Okay, so first question, how has and hasn't your schooling up to and including Fairfield fulfilled Jefferson's goals? Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, have a little bit of a unique perspective on this because he was all about kind of like cultivating like geniuses and like cultivating their gifts. And when I was in, I think like fifth grade, I was still in public school. I wasn't in Catholic school yet. In our math classes, we would actually be grouped after we would take a test based on the grades we got.
Hmm.
So basically she would put people who I guess had the same intellect and the same like measurement of how they understood it together. And we would like do that after every test. So I thought that was kind of interesting because it's kind of basically like what he was trying to say with his like ideology.
Hmm. Yeah, so from the video, what I found is like he mentioned the video mentioned that like he wants like education to be available to everyone, not just the wealthiest. Through education, it will help secure independence. And also like within our school curriculum, we should, education, it should like focus on like teaching history, science, and humanities courses. So in terms of like Fairfield, that I know in our business, in our core curriculum, they do have history and also the social and natural science courses that we are required to take. In terms of like, having, making education available to everyone. But I see that Fairfield University tuition is like almost like 70K a year. So it is really hard for, everyone, who doesn't have enough money to go to Fairfield U. And also not just Fairfield U, like almost any universities now, their tuition is really, really high. So because of that, expensive education, it makes a lot of barriers for many the students to enter into universities. Yeah, that's what I have so far. And also it talks about like civic responsibility. So it could go into like, how Fairfield University have like community services, leadership activities. So it does align with Jefferson's goal that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mostly saw it as like well, the part that I focused on most was meritocracy. So it was discussing how exactly Jefferson wanted like the new America to be based on like, your merit. So if you had the skills and abilities to pretty much like help the country, that's what it would be based on. It would not be based on your birth or your like aristocracy rights, for example, as they had in Europe. And I think that really like set the tone for the US because we definitely have like an individualistic sense here where essentially, you're pretty much starting from the bottom and it's like your ability to work and get to the top that like, that's like really like seen as a part of the national identity, so to say. So like that's one thing that I really found interesting within that video. And then another one was like I think it was regarding like slavery. I think like one of the I think like the older gentleman, he was talking about like how they Jefferson and some of the anti-federalists, they were using like slavery as an example for the fight for freedom. But I found it a little ironic that they were using like slavery as an example for the Revolutionary War, yet they still had slaves within the US. I don't know. I just felt that I just found it to be a little ironic within that regard.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely agree with that. 'Cause I think he like specifically had said that like slavery was almost like school for learning how to be the opposite of a good Republican, but yet they still did evoke that practice. Like it didn't end there. It just kept going, even though I guess Jefferson and other people of his nature had doubts about it, but nothing was really put in place to stop it, like until later on in history.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that.
Next question. How do the Enlightenment inspired panel institutions described by Fakwa compared to your views on what prisons should accomplish?
Yeah, I can go ahead with this one. So what I found to be rather interesting within M. Foucault's book was like how institutions and prisons, for example, weren't really seen as like a place of punishment as it
Mhm.
was compared to like the earlier ages. Rather, it was really starting to become a place of reform. because prisoners had rights, things like, they had to work, but they also had the opportunity to attend like school classes and also religious ceremonies and things like that. And I think from there it really installed like a sense of like discipline and like organization within their lives. And yes, of course, like, there might have been justifications for them being there if they had committed violent crimes or things like that. But I think it really set the tone on like how you could possibly reform like a portion of the population, should they end up in prison. And I think like the services they provided definitely helped gear those individuals towards, possibly rejoining society later on.
Yeah. My views on what prison should accomplish is that, what the book was doing, like, rehabilitation and, working toward like prevention of crime in the future by like educating them, giving them a strict set of rules, like what they should do, like, teaching them how to be more religious by making them a schedule to attend chapel, to get, learn more about religion. And also, like, I like how they were, prioritizing um education more, to figure out, like, what they actually did wrong, like like that made them to commit crime. And also, like, what they should more focus on is the root cause of the crime, such as like poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunities that those people didn't get. So providing those opportunities to them, it will, probably prevent more crimes and give them more, when they get out of the prison, they will be more educated and, have the education to be better and work with the society.
Yeah, I think I was definitely most interested by like the Philadelphia model, which was around like page 126, because that one really focused on like observing the people's souls. And I feel like some people who were in prison might not have been in prison for the most violent of deeds. So it's like they can really atone for their crimes. And it's like if they're working on themselves, like maybe they could get shorter sentences. But it's also like they also have the opportunity to kind of reflect on what they did and why it happened. And I also think that that model had a little bit of that merit-based stuff that Jefferson was talking about, because they did a lot of work. And I think it's like based on like if they did good work or not, they would get rewards from that. So it's also like they got to like practice working, being in like real life, while also being observed and trying to work on their own personal growth.
Yeah, the Philadelphia model, was that would you say like that's like an early like iteration of juvenile detention? Because I mentioned that like most of the people there, they were like on the younger side.
Um, I honestly I would think maybe because I do remember reading that they were on the younger side, and I think that juvenile detention is kind of, I think, at least more geared towards working on the people themselves, not just putting them in prison and punishing them. So I think it could definitely be an early model of that type of institution.
Yeah, I think they were like looking at the behavior of the criminals and deciding, if their sentences should be reduced or not.
Yeah, I wonder then if it's like if that was like perhaps like one of like the earlier models of like, like, targeting individuals who were like at risk. So like the youth, for example, before they had like an opportunity to commit like more violent crimes and then end up in the prison system. I think that might be like one way of like looking at it, I would say. Hopefully I'm not reaching.
Next question. How do the Enlightenment-inspired panel institutions described by Fuqua relate to your schooling up to and Fairfield, including Fairfield?
I think
This was an interesting, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, I think that kind of just what I just talked about with the Philadelphia model, like because they were promoted to work so much and kind of be disciplined in that way. That's like kind of how schooling goes. Like we're kind of, especially in like primary and grammar school, like we're kind of taught we go to school for 8 hours and then we go home and we work on it and we keep doing that again and again. And then it's like by the time we get to college, now it's like we pick our own schedule, but we still need to have that same discipline that we learned earlier on and like carry it on with us throughout our lives. And I feel like that's what they were teaching in some prisons, just to try and get the prisoners to like discipline themselves and stay on like the same track.
Yeah, I actually have like a different way of looking at it. I think like for me specifically, I don't really see like the similarities between what FOCO has in terms of like the penal institutions, comparing that to my schooling, because I would say we definitely have a lot more freedom compared to, you know, those people in the institutions. You know, obviously they've committed crimes, but you know, there's like, I would say there's less freedom in their lives. You know, they're like forced to stick to a rigid schedule. So they wake up at like 6 in the morning. They have to clean themselves up. They have to work for a certain time. They have to attend religious classes, attend school classes, and it's back to work again. So there's really like no time that you would have to develop like in other areas of your life, for example, or like any hobbies, you know, that like a regular child might have. So I'd say definitely, you know, there's a lot more rigidness to the institutions compared to, you know, the school classes you would take and public.
Yeah, so what I wrote is that like Foucault's enlightenment inspired penal institutions. It referred to the idea of like discipline and control, which is kind of I see similar to the structure of schooling, because you know, both institutions have hierarchical power structure where those in charge hold the power to discipline and punish those below them. For example, in our school system, there is surveillances and monitoring, you know, to see if people are doing wrong, right, and discipline them in that sense. Yeah, we're expected to follow rules just like in prison. They had very strict rules in regarding of schooling, schedule, and routine. So it's kind of similar.
Yeah, I think I can agree that the extremity to which prisons are controlled is different than how normal schooling goes. And this is a little bit off topic, but the way that their schedules were disciplined is kind of almost to me like military school, or like how people in the military act. Like their days are very much scheduled, maybe rather than like us in college or even us in like middle or high school. Like we definitely had a lot more freedom. So I actually think it kind of relates to the military and how disciplined they are.
Yeah, pretty much. And like, you know, cleanliness is something that was really advocated for. So like, you know, in the military, that's something, you know, that definitely is like pretty much like pounded into your mind, where like organization and cleanliness are like the like two of like the things you should prioritize within your life. So yeah, I could definitely see that. But yeah, one thing that Tahmina brought up was those the rules. Like yeah, I definitely didn't think about like having like rules in class, or yeah, there are rules, but like, you know, the extremity to which it's enforced is not, it's like not really comparable to what these guys had to go through.
Right. And like goes back to like freedom, you know, like in school we have so much freedom. We get to choose our own schedule. We can choose a time we want to take a certain class, to like when we want to do activity. But for them it's like 30 minutes, the next 30 minutes they have to do that, and then after next 30 minutes they have to do that. It's like already set for them. So they have, you know, less freedom than we do, but like as like discipline, the power, like above us, the deans, they hold the power to, you know, discipline us if we break any rules, like cheating, for example. So kind of similar to, in terms of that. You guys have anything else to add to this?
No, do not.
Okay, so it says relate to text 3 to text 1 or 2. What's your personal take on text 3? Might it make for a better society? Based on what I read from the brain reading machine, it is a good technology to like see, you know, the diseases, the stroke, obesity, and addiction that people might have within the brain. They could like check, but um, in terms of if it would make a better society, I think it was talking about like how um like, you know, doing that using the technology can remove people's memory within their brain, so that takes people's freedom from their life. Uh yeah, but I don't, yeah, but in terms of like how we would do good, I think Dr. Gelland, he believes that brain reading technology can benefit people like who are suffering from locked-in syndrome and disease and stroke. So that is one benefit of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of the points that you made, especially the one with like, the freedom versus like, if you can't really control your actions, like I don't see how that, constitutes freedom. Yes, there are like positives where, if like someone is like, has a substance abuse issue, then that could
Mhm.
possibly be helped, with using like the brain technology. But then it like, it delves into that debate of, if it's like freedom versus like, I suppose like morality. Like yeah, it could, the moral choice, like, is there, but at the same time, you're not really free, so to say.
Yeah.
And this is a little off topic, but I was thinking of like how exactly, this might be used in like a prison setting. I remember reading this article once where it's like this like technology can be utilized to like simulate the mind to think like one day is equal to like 1,000 years, for example, and like relating that to like the prison, to the article about the reform institutions. I was wondering, there are definitely mentions of like solitary confinement and how exactly it wasn't really something that an inmate would want to experience. So I was thinking that, if there was someone were to experience solitary confinement for 1,000 years in one day, I don't think their mental health would be able to take it. I think at a moment in time, they would just consider just committing suicide just to end that pain.
Yeah, I think the part of it where it was talking about like every time you were working on something and you lost focus, like you could change that so you would always be able to like focus on something. And then it kind of got into the ethical issues of, well, how are we gonna know like if we're thinking of something, if it's our own thoughts? And I think that if this were to occur over like a whole society and it kept going, I think eventually we would just come to a point where we would all almost be like robots, that we would all come
Mhm.
to everyone's thinking the same thing. And it's like at that point, it's almost like we'd become mindless, like we wouldn't be ourselves, which is what I think would be one of the biggest ethical issues that they talked about in this is
Yeah.
that how do we know how far we should go before we start to lose ourselves as people and then even as our freedom too?
Yeah, going back with what you said, like concerning regarding privacy and security, right? It sounds like brain implants can read like our thoughts. So we are not like sure how those people who's in charge, right, might use this information and they might even violate our rights and freedoms that way, misusing, our thoughts or God knows what.
Yeah, basically, if we can't control our actions, then I don't know, like how, like who would be able to do so? And if
Right.
so, if we were, in charge of like, our own minds, then like if anything that we've done, like could that be associated to us?
Mhm. Yeah.
I think like going back to Jefferson's main ideal about like really cultivating geniuses, like I feel like this type of mind technology, it would almost work in his favor because he could like make those people who are already naturally smart or naturally have a gift make that better. But then it's like if they continue to do that, like what happens to all their other attributes? Like, are we just going to create almost like super geniuses? Like how I wonder how that would work in like the contrast of society and like hierarchies if it was in a situation like that.
Yeah, super geniuses or super slaves. I'd say like one or the other.
I think it like almost goes back to that like whole mindless thing. Like that's great if you're really great at one thing, like you're a super genius, but what happens to everything else? Like, can you think for yourself or are you just almost like a robot that's just programmed to do this one thing?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all for the questions. You guys have anything else to add? No.
Okay, I'll stop recording.